Hello everyone, welcome back for some more Let's Read Fate Strange Fake. We're moving on with the next chapters here. We have an interlude chapter, Mercenary, Assassin, Vampire 1. And then it looks like we're going right back to the action we were at before. That's pretty exciting. So, with all that said, let's get going with our reading. Interlude, Mercenary, Assassin, Vampire 1. Zoom in just a little bit more. There we go. They're all so reckless. Sigma's face showed no emotion, but there was a tinge of exasperation in his voice. He was a young magecraft-using mercenary on the side of the masterminds of the Holy Grail War. He was originally supposed to become Lancer's master, but he had ended up haunted by a heroic spirit of the enigmatic Watcher class, and had formed a temporary alliance with Saber and Assassin in order to increase his chances of survival after his fashion. He had come to observe the servant that had formed a contract with a comatose girl in the hospital, as well as the other enemy factions targeting her based on information provided by Watcher's shadows. He had passed what he had learned from his servant on to Saber and Assassin under the pretext that it was data from his superiors. A mysterious heroic spirit, supposed to have a bird's eye view of everything that took place in the city. Sigma had been drawn into the Holy Grail War without being told the characteristics of the Watcher class, without having a clear goal of his own. For that, everyone around him had treated him as Soldier A. Francesca, who had brought him into the Grail War, had wanted him to continue being Soldier A, so that was hardly surprising. The heroic spirit that had contracted with Sigma, however, was in the process of transforming him into something special in the fake Holy Grail War. Oh, okay. Even so, Sigma's combat ability was no match for a heroic spirit's. While he gained experience as a magecraft-using mercenary in battlefields around the world, he had, of course, never fought an extraordinary familiar like a servant. The sight of the attacks of the golden heroic spirit was enough to tell him how out of place he was. "That's Gilgamesh, the king of heroes. One of the earliest heroes," said a boy with a serpent staff. Okay, that might be Asclepius, maybe. I don't know if that counts for him. They were Watcher's terminals, a system for conveying information to their master. Possibly they were linked directly to Sigma's brain, because no one else could see or hear them. Sigma thought it would have been easier if they were just hallucinations, but the information they provided was accurate, and given that they provided information he could not possibly know, he had no choice but to admit they were genuinely the power of a heroic spirit. To be blunt, you don't stand a chance now. Obviously, Sigma mentally agreed with the shadow, which had changed from the boy with a serpent staff to a young man with mechanical wings on his back. Okay, again, I'm fairly certain that that's going to be Icarus or Daedalus, probably Icarus. He could tell at a glance that those were no ordinary weapons that the heroic spirit was firing out of empty space. That was not an opponent he could handle with magecraft or modern firearms. He might have been able to distract him for an instant with a stun grenade or flashbang, but he doubted that would be any advantage in the face of the heroic spirit called Gilgamesh. It would be something if he could at least coordinate perfectly with Saber, but they had only just met, and Saber's master, Kasejo, claimed to not be a proper master or even a mage. That being the case, there was only one person who might contribute to combat in this situation. She was a heroic spirit like Saber or Gilgamesh, the girl assassin standing next to him. What will you do? He did not have a definite plan. Nevertheless, if he just stood there without attacking or retreating, he would only sink into this brutal mire. In which case, he judged his best option would be to act according to the cards in the hands of those around him. "I'm going to protect the child," she answered quietly. "Do you know where her room is?" "Are you really going? You'll probably end up facing down either that archer turned demon or that golden Gatling gun." "I won't go through the front. I hate to admit it, but immature as I am, it would literally take everything I am to execute them. Even then, I'm not certain I would be able to see it through. That I wouldn't matter if I were only concerned, but our objective is to save the child." "That's those police officers' objective, not yours." Assassin looked at Sigma in confusion, as if she did not understand his intention. Sigma spoke to her in a matter-of-fact tone. "You've never met the child, and the probability of her becoming either an enemy or ally is low. In fact, If the heroic spirit contracted to your target is hostile, you'll end up in direct confrontation with a heroic spirit you don't need to fight. Logically, it wouldn't be to your advantage. I'd forgotten you were without faith. Assassin nodded as if to say that explained everything, looked straight at Sigma and said, There is a benefit. A logical reason. What reason? Why he asked, Sigma himself did not know. Probably it was purely because he could not fully comprehend what would drive Assassin to willingly get involved in a troublesome situation. Assassin answered without hesitation. If it will save a growing child, there could be no greater benefit. As she spoke, she soundlessly moved into action. She began a roundabout approach to the hospital, threading her way through the openings in the street-turned battlefield. Sigma followed. I don't understand, he asked, half to himself. Child or not, she's still a stranger. You don't even know if she follows the same faith as you. If she were doing it to add more adherence to her faith, he could understand it. But should she really risk her life to save the child? I am still immature. Properly speaking, the deeply faithful do not consider benefits. Just by living, they hear a great voice, as naturally as breathing, and choose that path. I don't really understand common morality, but aren't you trying to save a child in this situation because your faith is deep? Sigma's words caused the fully mature fanatic to turn and look at him for a moment. Her eyes were filled with anger at herself and a deep sadness. I was not able to abandon my anger at the heathens. I was not able to have tolerance. As long as my current course is mixed with my wish to save others, it is merely a proud disdain for destiny. Because of that immaturity, I was not permitted to walk the path to the mountain enclosure. They stealthily crossed Main Street and drew closer to the hospital. The police force in Bowman had begun to fight, and that other archer, Gilgamesh, and Saber were also engaged in combat. Assassin might survive a hit from a stray projectile, but Sigma certainly would not. He used Magecraft to dampen sounds and strengthen his body, and followed closely behind the carefully advancing Assassin while remaining wary of both battles. Assassin continued to speak dispassionately. But that doesn't matter. My immaturity is no reason not to save a child. I see. At that, Sigma slightly lowered his gaze, thinking about the word child, and muttered, in spite of himself, No one saved us. For an instant, Assassin, who was approaching the back of the hospital, froze. Sigma realized that he had made a slip of the tongue and expressionlessly averted his eyes from Assassin. An instant later, the voice of one of the shadows, the old man who said, Call me Captain, came up from behind. You put your foot in your mouth this time, boy. Are you stupid? What were you thinking, whining that no one saved you to somebody trying to save someone else? Are you jealous of that whelp sleeping in the hospital? Will you be happy if you slow her down by spouting bullshit, and that kid ends up as bad off as you? Sigma made no attempt to refute that scornful voice. That was partly because responding to a voice that only he could hear would make Assassin suspicious of him. It was also because there was nothing he could say to refute it. Sigma had neither a strong wish for a grail nor a reason to survive. He was a mercenary who had kept struggling and made to that point based solely on a vague feeling that he didn't want to die. Given that the attitude had kept him alive so far, it might actually be one of his strong points, but it was certainly not something he'd be proud of. Assassin's words had reminded him of his childhood, reminded him of how the person sitting next to him might be a bloodless thing to be disposed of by nightfall, and he had instinctively blurted it out. Why? Why had there been no salvation for them? Why would the girl in the hospital be saved? What separated her from them? Before, he would have dismissed such things as just luck. So why had those words come out of him? Sigma realized that his being was becoming unstable. This isn't a good trend. Not as a Magecraft user, not as a mercenary either. People who let themselves waver died. He had seen it happen many times in the course of his work. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Sigma attempted to regain his composure by adding to the conversation, but Assassin cut him short by looking straight at him and said, My immaturity prevented me from saving you as a child. I was unable to be there and save you. That is proof of my immaturity. You're a heroic spirit, Sigma responded to Assassin's seemingly unreasonable declaration. I don't know when you died, but we existed in different times and places. You couldn't have met me as a child. Differences of time and place are trivial. As proof of that, you and I are here right now, standing in the same place. From Sigma's perspective, her words were abnormal. She stated with certainty that, if her faith were perfect, she would have appeared before the young Sigma and saved him. If he were currently happy, Assassin's words might have angered him. If, despite being unfortunate, he had chosen his own path, he might have argued with her. I'm satisfied, he might have said. No one ever pitied me because you never appeared to me. But that anger did not come to him. Sigma himself half agreed with what she said. Oh, I see. Did I want someone to save me? If someone had saved us back there, would things have been different? If I'd been saved before Francesca and the others destroyed the country, before everyone died, or even earlier, if my mother had been saved. No, if my mother had been saved, I never would have been born. Sigma cast his eyes down in silence as he remembered the details of his birth. You saved everyone. I wouldn't be happy or unhappy. I wouldn't be at all. That's an interesting way of looking at it. I think there was a comedy like that. Assassin seemed confused by Sigma talking to himself. Sigma answered the question she had asked before they began to move. From here, the police's target, Kuraoka Tsubaki, is in the room on the far right of the top floor. Assassin heard him and quietly nodded. I thank you. I'll take care of the rest. Wait. Sigma, still expressionless, stopped Assassin. After considering for a moment, he said, I'll go too. I'm not sure about just protecting her, but there may be a way to carry her out while preventing infection. According to Watcher's information, Kuraoka Tsubaki was infected with a non-airborne pathogen. There's no guarantee it would stay that way. After all, she had an unknown heroic spirit with her. There was a possibility that it could act on her to alter the characteristics of the bacteria. On the other hand, if they could get that heroic spirit on their side, it would be a powerful ally. It would make it easier to transport Tsubaki to a safe location. If the police then incapacitated the heroic spirit as planned, he would be able to make a satisfactory report to Faldius without difficulty. That was Sigma's idea. Don't push yourself. I'll carry her out if the need arises, Assassin told Sigma. It seems she had not expected him to accompany her all the way. The black-haired youth, however, quietly shook his head. I doubt the girl's body could handle the way you move. She's been in a coma for a long time. You put a heavy strain on her, it might be enough to stop her heart. When I was little, when my comrades died that way. Sigma proposed a strategy, without putting that memory into words. I'm probably more used to handling a stretcher than you are. After we've gotten her out, I'll tell that demonic-looking bowman. If I do that, he shouldn't target the hospital. If they manage to protect Tsubaki, the hospital collapsed, it would be a disaster. Oh, how interesting. Whose sake did you just propose that plan for? Oh wait, no, never mind. Oh, how interesting. Whose sake did you just propose that plan for? The shadow in the form of the boy with the serpent staff asked him, sounding pleased for some reason. Oh. Cosmetical. For whose sake? It has nothing to do with your mission. You said that yourself not too long ago. There's no benefit, so why are you trying to support her? The shadow sounded as if it were testing him. Oh, excuse me. I may be a shadow, but I'm influenced by my behavior from when I was alive. I'd probably look different if I were to manifest as a heroic spirit. Still, we shadows do have behaviors that resemble individual wills. Consider it a joke from the residue seared into a shadow's shadow and let it slide. So that boy with the serpent staff said, but Sigma could not let it go so easily. After all, Sigma himself could not explain why he decided to go along. This really isn't a good trend. Why didn't I leave things to her and retreat? Losing sight of the course of your own mind is a fatal flaw, both as a mercenary and a magecraft user. Sigma was on the verge of announcing that he had reconsidered and would withdraw after all when... I thank you, Assassin said, dropping her gaze. Her voice arrested Sigma's heart. You are striving to do good. You are far more worthy of being saved than me, sullied as I am. If I say actually I'm leaving now will create a fatal gap. That would impair both the chances of my mission succeeding and my chance of survival. The thought flashed through Sigma's brain. He followed her in silence without giving an answer. The noise of the heroic spirit's fierce battles resounded through the night. They put distance between themselves and that clamor by circling around to the back of the hospital. After making sure there was no one to be seen nearby, they entered the hospital grounds. Inside the 10-story hospital, the police mages had taken measures to clear the area of people and place a sleeping spell on the inpatient ward. Even the nurses working the night shift were asleep for the moment, and it was the inpatient's normal bedtime. Because there was risk of unnecessary harm if the sleeping patient's condition suddenly worsened, the magecraft was to remain in effect for the shortest possible time. Sigma, who had heard that information from Watcher, decided that he could therefore afford to make a little noise and attempt to take the shortest route from the rear of the hospital. He advanced quickly through the back garden. When he made it about halfway across, Assassin grabbed the collar of Sigma's gear and yanked him hard to the side. Before he could ask what she was trying to do, they rained down on the spot where Sigma had been standing. Numerous metal weapons stuck into the ground. They were twisted weapons of death. Spears formed from countless scalpels, scissors, and other sharp instruments, half melted and fused together. Seeing them rain down, Sigma guessed they contained every scalpel, razor, and bone cutter in the hospital. Right, boy. You spent this short time gathering sharp objects from all over the hospital. The shadow in the form of the captain smirked a short distance away. Now time for the second trial. Overcome it and grow, boy. Sigma ignored him and looked in the direction the spear seemed to come from, and there, around the 5th floor of the hospital, a man stood perpendicular to the white wall. Sigma's magic circuit shuddered, partly because beside him, Assassin's magical energy had gone wild, but more than that, because the magical energy within the thing that stood on the wall with a disregard for gravity was so unnerving. Perhaps it was not just his perception of magical energy, but his instincts as someone who had fought for so long as a magecraft using Mercenary. That thing is bad news. The shadows told me that there was a hematophage, but that thing is high-ranking even for one of them. Not one of the highest, but it's on another level from an ordinary monster. It isn't something a human should ever fight. He had fought a similar creature only once before. That time, he had just barely managed to defeat it by working with other well-known mages and magecraft users, but the survival instinct he had built up as a magecraft user was warning him that that thing in front of him was more dangerous than the one he had brought down. For a moment, Sigma froze, overwhelmed not by fear, but by magical energy. Then that thing spoke to him. You made the right choice, boy. If just now, the thing continued to the suspicious Sigma while slowly clapping his hands, you had tried to leave that darling girl and retreat alone, I would have gouged out your heart, ground it in the dirt, and spread it across the feed trough in a pigsty. The man arbitrarily denigrated pigsties as he dropped to the ground with a broad grin. After making a courteous bow, the thing pulled off a tricky feat of grinning ecstatically with the mouth while glaring at Sigma with rage-filled eyes and said, You also made the worst possible choice, boy. It was an absurd declaration, contradicting his earlier statement. It is absolutely unforgivable for a puny human to try and walk with my darling. I will not tolerate my lovely assassin so much as making conversation with the likes of you. The thing cracked his neck, spread his arms wide, and proclaimed his fierce resentment with a wicked grin. I'll make you incapable of dying, and then suck out your magic circuits one by one. I'll squash your eyeballs, break every bone in your body, peel off your flesh, violate your brain, rape your heart. Oh my god. Well, 4 chambers, I guess. Pound your lungs into paste, chop your guts into mincemeat. Ooh! Oh, I have it. I'll rip your body into millions and billions of pieces while you're still alive and spread it around the feed trough in a chicken coop. His voice grew steadily louder as he arched his back and stared up at the sky. He did a Dio pose, you're saying, which reflected the gleam of the golden heroic spirit's noble phantasms, then shifted to an ecstatic grin and turned his head to stare at Assassin. I wonder what face you'll make when that happens to someone you open your heart to, even if only a little. Oh, how wonderful! You truly are wonderful. Just picturing you sullied by your own tears is enough to make me cry. That thing, the dead apostle that called itself Jester, actually shed tears of joy as he spoke. Assassin, watching him, had already sprung into action. Stifling her emotions but putting all the indignation she had built up until a moment before into her magical energy, she leapt at the monster that was her master. In place of the fiend's magical energy, she had a temporary supply Saber had lent her. She poured most of it into her noble phantasm. Clad me in black sharpness. Unfeeling patrolling spirits. Zabania! Alright. Now we're moving back on to the fight outside with Golden Lions 2. Here we go. The King of Heroes, clad in golden armor, Gilgamesh the Judge, was still standing where he had started on the roof of the church. The church roof was pincushioned with noble phantasms and had collapsed in places, but the wards set on it must have been powerful because it remained barely recognizable as a roof. To a casual observer, it looked like a beautiful dance. Tine and the other mages, actually watching the scene through far-seeing spells, were captivated by the sight of Saber dancing in the gap between life and death with incredible speed. It was a contest between kings, and it was certainly not equal. The Golden King stood on high, and the other kings struggled to supplant him. Taken the other way around, it looked like a greater king passing judgment on a lesser one. But that was why he charged. If they were both kings, then which of them was superior would change with time and circumstance. Their battle was a struggle for that height. One might call it the world's smallest scale war waged between the kings' spirit origins. Of course, one of the kings was armed with innumerable noble phantasms that his subjects had made and he had collected. The other, in contrast, had only 7 supporters. Okay, so there's 7. He specifically has 7, okay. The Golden King and Judge showered Saber with attacks without ever dropping his guard. Nevertheless, the king, once said to have a heart of a lion, kept up his advance, pushing himself to even greater speeds as he narrowly avoided death. Superhuman speed. It was usual for a battle between heroic spirits to appear superhuman. Even taking that into account, however, Saber's swiftness was extraordinary. Speed due to his fundamental abilities as a heroic spirit. Speed boosted through magecraft. Speed that could only be attributed to some kind of divine protection associated with anecdotes of his exploits and bestowed on him by the throne. By combining all of them, he darted his way across the cluster of buildings that had become his battlefield with singular speed, even for a heroic spirit, circling as he slowly but steadily closed distance. The Lionheart's advance, once begun, was like a gale scything across land and sea. Peerless speed of his march was so great that legend had it only a general blessed with protection against wind had succeeded in halting it. Incredibly, the Lionheart, said to have raced across a battlefield with 3 times the speed of an ordinary charge, at last drew close enough his sword to reach his opponent. So, you have the insolence to stand before me. As good as declaring that he had only just begun, the Golden King leapt backward while firing his Gate of Babylon in an effort to put more distance between himself and Saber. But his efforts gave Saber the perfect opportunity. Excalibur! Saber's sword shone, the arc of its swing becoming a massive band of light that flew at the airborne golden archer. Not so fast. Gilgamesh materialized countless shields in front of him, dispersing the band of light. To think you would strike at me with a mere imitation of a relic of the planet. Were we not in the middle of your trial? Such folly would merit death, mongrel. When the scattered light dissipated and the countless floating shields scattered, Saber was no longer to be seen in front of the Golden King. As he landed, he sensed immense magical energy from behind him, lower down the slanted roof of the church. The golden archer turned to look, his eyes narrow, and saw Saber with his sword posed to strike. Excalibur! A second band of light was fired up the slope. It was blocked by the countless shields, as the first had been, but this strike was an order of magnitude more powerful. It pushed the shields back, lifting the Golden King several meters into the air. How dare you? The Golden King saw through the gaps in his shield wall that Saber was holding one of the noble phantasms that he himself had fired. "I told you I was going to borrow them, didn't I?" Saber, still clutching the longsword, instantaneously slipped in directly underneath his airborne foe and made radiance envelop the blade once more. The first time he had released the true name of his noble phantasm, the decorative sword he had originally held had shattered with a single strike. The noble phantasm, shrouded in the ore of the Age of Gods, however, remained intact after his second true name release and retained its properties as a noble phantasm. He unleashed magical energy in a third band of light. The Golden King deployed shields beneath him and blocked the attack, but he was pushed further into the air. Then came the fourth band of light. Saber gave his opponent no time to recover and followed with a fifth and sixth slash of light aimed skyward from the church roof. Even more frighteningly, the interval between strikes was steadily shrinking. By the time they got past his 20th slash, bro just fired off 20 Excaliburs. They had become a massive continuous band of light firing from the earth into the sky. As if to say that this, too, was both an infinite series of blows and a never-ending single strike. What the frick? That's broken! Okay. Several minutes earlier, the hospital's front parking lot. A short while earlier. In the parking lot situated between the hospital and Main Street, the area had been cleared of people, so there were hardly any cars parked in the moderately spacious lot and no obstacles up to the hospital entrance that John had been flung into. The attack on John had triggered every police officer with strength to spare to spring into action at once. Each of them held a different noble phantasm. Fake noble phantasms, mere relics that had lost their original mystery and magical energy, but whose legends had been overwritten by Castor. It would be fair to say that they attacked with every trick they could think of: feints, sneak attacks from blind spots, and more. It could even be justly said that their teamwork had improved since their battle with Assassin at the police station. And yet Archer, having stolen Berserker's noble phantasm, had gained the power of a demon, did not even make an effort to dodge them or to deflect them with his weapon. He took every blade and projectile aimed at him, but they had no apparent effect. Shit. Is he the same as that dead apostle Jester? One of the officers ground his teeth. Memories of the moment they had been crushed in the police station flashed through their minds. Faced with what was becoming a repeat of that last defeat, the members of Clan Calatin never considered fleeing. If they retreated, they would lose the raison d'etre called justice. Like John, they carried their chief's nearly hypnotic words with them. That said, an honorable death was not what they wanted. They continued to think of ways they might stop the monster confronting them. While they thought, the now grotesque Archer advanced. But every attack they aimed at his visor was stopped by the cloth he wore. When they attacked his exposed arms and sides in contract, they felt their attacks connect but never managed to reach the level of an effective blow. On top of the cloth that completely nullified their attacks, his bare body specs might have been extraordinary as well, given that he had absorbed the demon's power. Although the police officers did not understand exactly what had happened, they supposed that his endurance and resistance to magical energy must have improved as a result. In that case, did the enemy facing them have any weaknesses at all? While the words "give up" ran through the officers' heads, grotesque Bowman was steadily advancing step by step. Why doesn't he just rush us? Yeah, another answered. He would probably knock all of us out of the way in no time. At that, a woman who had been coolly observing the situation from a short distance away, Vera Levette, the police chief's aide-de-camp, okay, never heard that term before, and effectively one of the leaders of Clan Calatin, said, "He's probably on his guard." She was a true mage, as well as a police officer. Although she had been born the younger daughter of a mage bloodline, her elder sister's magic circuits were poor, so she had been brought up by her mother, who carried the family's magic crest. Her elder sister Amelia worked in Snowfield as a doctor, still ignorant of the world of magecraft. Right, we did hear about that. Because her lineage had cooperated in running this Holy Grail War, Vera, as their heir, had joined the war, having inherited a portion of her mother's magic crest. It was an incomplete succession, given that the crest transplant was not yet complete, but her strength stood out among Clan Calatin, and it would be no exaggeration to call her the chief's right hand. Her next action was to take a little glass test tube that did not match her modern gear from her belt of equipment. She threw it in front of the enemy bowman and fired at it with a particularly decorated revolver she held. Her bullet accurately pierced the test tube. A moment later, a smoke screen spread over the area. And no ordinary smoke screen. A smoke screen charged with magical energy of randomly shifting nature. Call it jamming for magical energy perception. Watching the dense smoke, which naturally also obscured his vision, spread, the bowman muttered in a low voice, "Impudence." Then, he moved his enormous body in a great leap, avoiding the smoke. Vera had read the situation correctly. The grotesque bowman, Alcides, was wary, not of the police force, but of other factors. Saber, who had appeared without warning, and the King of Heroes, who had entered combat with him. They were fighting each other for the moment, but there was no telling when they might turn their attacks on him. He could also sense another heroic spirit origin on Saber's side, and the presence of the monster that had stopped his initial attack on the hospital with a shield of water had not vanished. This was not a duel to be fought honorably. It was a never-ending melee, in which one had to outwit one's opponent and could not afford to show even the least opening at one's back. Alcides understood that. He could slaughter the police force spreading out and attacking him in an instant, but he would have to proceed carefully to do it without creating an opening. That was because the police force posed more than a certain level of power. What they had acquired, the resolve to risk their lives, had not been for nothing. There were 25 police officers on the scene. The rest remained in the station to guard the chief and to gather information. The bowman's hellhound, Kerberos, had appeared just as they were about to dispatch an advance team to the target's hospital room, so none of them had reached the hospital room yet. How many do you have to send to Kuroki Tsubaki's room? If the servant possessing Kuroki Tsubaki is hostile, a small team will end up dying for nothing. Vera whispered her opinion to a female officer with a bow noble phantasm. I would have liked to send Berserker, who could have dealt with it alone, but Berserker had suffered serious damage to his spirit origin and likely had withdrawn with the aid of Flat's command spells. If the servant is capable of understanding that Kuroki Tsubaki is being targeted, it should take action to protect its master. The fact that she still hasn't withdrawn from the hospital means that either it hasn't noticed what's happening and doesn't intend to protect her, or is confident that it can protect her without moving. Vera, thinking that the latter would be preferable, produced another several test tubes and scattered them around her. No sooner had the tubes, thrown with the age of magecraft flown through the air to cover a wide area than bullets shattered all of them, spreading more smoke over the area. Vera was about to order someone to scout out the hospital room, taking advantage of the delay when a wasted effort. The grotesque archer flapped the demonic wings that grew from his back, kicking up a wind charged with dense magical energy around him. The wind-carrying sinister magical energy formed a number of small whirlwinds, began to catch the smoke as if devouring it. How are we supposed to deal with this shit? One of the officers asked, his cheek twitching. Despair began to spread across the officer's face, when a lone figure dashed the smoke screen. Stop! It's no use! The officers called out to restrain the figure. They could not see its face clearly through the windstorms and trailing smoke. They could tell that it wore the same uniform as they did. Alcides judged it to be a reckless charge. No matter what sort of attack the approaching police officer attempted, it would have no effect on him. If he struck with his bare fists, the blow would ignore the protection of the Nemean lion's pelts. But in that case, the attack would not even scratch him, unless it was charged with a great deal of magical energy. If he drew his bow, both of his hands would have been occupied for an instant. That would obviously present the other heroic spirits with an opening. The King of Heroes in particular was capable of sending a lethal strike his way while crossing swords with Saber. Even a stray shot could prove fatal if it happened to strike a gap in the Nemean lion's pelt. If only he possessed the noble phantasm that gave him 12 lives. Okay, there we go. He does not have it, which had been left before by his metamorphosis, who would probably have given little thought to the possibility and drawn his bow with all his might. See, this is good, because I was really worried he also had that, because that would have been so broken. But his present state did not merit leaving such an opening. In that case, he decided he need only to brush the attacker aside with a blow of his arm, as he had done that to the first brave officer whose neck he had shattered. Alcides raised his arm and waited for the police officer concealed by darkness and smoke to approach him. Then, that instant, he sensed immense magical energy swell up behind him. This magical energy. Saber. The saber who had been fighting with Gilgamesh must have fired some kind of noble phantasm. Sensing its magical energy was not aimed at him but the sky, Alcides did not take his eye off the small threat closing in on him from the front. It was an action born from his refusal to drop his guard against even the weakest enemy. No. It was not that he did not look away. He could not look away. It was an effect produced by his mind's eye. It was not instinct. His accumulated skill and experience, his honed senses, the blood and flesh that comprised him all dominated his spirit and refused to let him look away. It was not the other heroic spirits he ought to truly be wary of. It was the lone police officer closing in on him. Everything he had built up to told him so. The reason why would soon become clear. Before Alcides, a pillar of light pierced the sky and illuminated the face of the approaching police officer before him. At the sight of that face, which appeared through a tear in the smoke screen created by the whirlwinds, Alcides muttered, "What?" It was unmistakably the face of a man whose neck had been broken and had been sent flying into the hospital entrance a short while before. "Oh!" The officer let out a wordless roar and kicked the ground. His instantaneous acceleration exceeded Alcides' expectations. His arm moved to block, but before it could reach, the man's slight frame sprang at Alcides with the force of a bullet and delivered a flying knee to the bridge of the grotesque archer's cloth-covered nose with all his might. Did he just do a Captain Falcon knee? No way! John? John Falcon? The police officers shouted in surprise. The way John had been sent flying earlier had put the words instant death into most of their minds. He might have magic circuits, but he lacked the magic crest which only one child in a lineage could inherit. If he had a crest, which would have performed self-restoration magecraft when he was on the brink of death, it would have been a different story, but no one could imagine that John could survive without one, much less reappear so much stronger than he seemed like a different person. But he had. He had reappeared shrouded in magical energy that far surpassed that of an ordinary mage, and made use of that energy to enhance his body and nerves several-fold. John. I see. So that man's name is John. Alcides, despite taking a flying knee and being knocked backwards, coolly noted information about his opponent as he spun in midair and landed feet first. Those feet, however, were swept out from under by John, who had circled around him even farther behind without his noticing. Oh! Alcides sounded impressed. He then caught himself with one arm on the ground and used his free arm to block John's follow-up attack. The shock ran through Alcides' whole body with a creaking of flesh and bone. John followed up with a series of barehanded strikes, continuing to batter Alcides without giving him a chance to ready his blow. What happened? He's like a different man. Or should I say he's matured? He had gone beyond the level of ordinary humans even for a mage. The experience Alcides had built up over his lifetime warned him that the power surging for the police officer before him rivaled the enemy generals he had fought in ancient Greece in brute strength. Was it his noble phantasm? Did Castor do something? Alcides noted that his body was being damaged, but it was not enough to make him register danger. Compared to when that Amazonian queen had struck him using her noble phantasm, the pain was like being punched by a child. And yet, he regarded the man before him with the greatest possible caution. Why? Alcides wondered as he fended off the flurry of blows. Why was I wary of this man? The vortex of magical energy that had sprung up behind him ought to have him concerned. Have him concerned more than the strikes like these. And yet everything he had accumulated was telling him not to take his eyes off this human. His strength is certainly more than human, but he hasn't reached the level of a warrior heroic spirit. So why? He wondered as he continued to take blow after blow. His attention was first drawn to the unnaturalness of his opponent's attacks. Why doesn't he use his right hand? Throughout his flurry of unarmed strikes, the police officer called John never attacked with his right hand. The difference is in his center of gravity. The prosthetic? While attacking and defending at split-second intervals, Alcides instantaneously deduced the truth behind his opponent's unnatural movements. That being the case, he wondered what that prosthetic hand could be. Does it conceal a weapon? If so, it won't penetrate this pelt. No, this man should already know that. Should I assume that it conceals magecraft then? Alcides focused every nerve on his body on John's right arm while evading his close-quarter attacks. It must be some kind of... No. Is it? He felt a presence. A slight presence, a unique magical energy, or perhaps a curse, was escaping from the man's prosthetic hand. The instant that presence, which retained faint vestiges of the Age of Gods, tickled Alcides' nostrils and skin, a chill of fear ran down Alcides' spine. Having noticed it, his instincts as a heroic spirit made him freeze in shock for just an instant. No matter how much his spirit origin changed, it had a special meaning for him. It was because he knew its dangers better than anyone, because he knew the terror of it better than anyone, that he himself had soaked his special arrowheads in... Oh! Hydra venom! Oh! Damn you! The instant Alcides shouted, John's right arm shone darkly, and a peculiarly shaped blade appeared from it, forming the back of his hand. A black liquid writhed around the prosthetic blade like a curse with a will of its own. It was one of the greatest calamities and most awful curses from the Age of Gods, one that killed countless heroes and even driven a certain great hero to take his own life. Yep, Hydra venom. The blade coiled and that incomparably fiendish toxin closed in on a gap in Alcides' cloth. Impossible. Has it survived into this era? That water snake shouldn't be able to exist on the surface anymore. He felt keenly how naive this thinking might have been. The mages of this era could not hold a candle to those of the Age of Gods. They were intelligent enough to wield its remnants, considering that his master likewise harbored the toxic, cursed mud in his body. He should have considered the possibility that his enemies possessed Hydra venom. Faced with a weapon capable of killing him, Alcides gripped his bow and leapt backward with all his might. "Hurry! To the hospital!" John shouted to his nearby fellow officers once he was sure Alcides had distanced himself. "I'll buy as much time as I can. Secure the target while I do." "John, what happened to you?" "I don't really understand myself, but it looks like Mr. Castor pulled off something for me." John then made to dash off, as if to say they would talk later, when a chill ran through his body this time, causing him to stop in his tracks in spite of himself. John strained his eyes, his whole body breaking out into a cold sweat. The grotesque bowman stood over 20 meters ahead of him, the intimidating air rising from him and magnified sevenfold. John had no difficulty figuring out why. The bowman had knocked an arrow to his bow. He had fired arrows several times before, but this was different. He was serious. The grotesque bowman spoke, paying his respects to John, who was trying to advance in spite of the chill. "You who possess the means to kill me, I acknowledge you as my foe." Crystal Hill, top floor. "Lord Gilgamesh!" Tine, on the top floor of Crystal Hill, viewed the king who was her servant, not through a far-seeing spell, but with her own naked eyes. Gilgamesh was being forced upward to a height of their base on the building's top floor. Oh my god, he just keeps going higher. His golden arm was completely engulfed in an even more radiant band of light, and it was no longer possible to perceive his figure. Not only Tine, but also the other members of her tribe were wide-eyed. The pillar of light that grew into the heavens from the church roof had ascended so high that its end could not be seen. Not even the King of Heroes could be engulfed in the torrent of power and emerge unscathed. Tine, sensing that, was on the verge of using a command spell to recall him when she sensed Gilgamesh's magical energy swell within that pillar of light. It would be more accurate to say that this massive concentration of magical energy had appeared around him. It was the same thing he had been doing all along, merely firing noble phantasms from his treasury out of empty space. Only the natures of the noble phantasms he deployed were a little different. The myriad of noble phantasms, although each shrouded in immense magical energy, formed a single titanic surge that coiled around the torrent of light itself, dispersing the light by brute force. The noble phantasms that had so fired monotonously now displayed the complex movements like those of a gigantic serpent. I'm sorry, is he basically doing the Kingdom Hearts Keyblade, like, riding stuff? Is that what we're getting at? Oh my god. But Gilgamesh was not using magical energy to control his armaments. Wait. Golden chains that reached out of thin air on all sides were entangling the swarms of noble... Oh my god, this is rad. They were entangling the swarms of noble phantasms and forcefully adjusting their trajectories. What the frick? Gilgamesh emerged from the dispersed light and, by gathering together the rain of noble phantasms, transformed them into a waterfall that plummeted earthward accompanied by a furious surge. It was like a great golden dragon devouring the light Saber unleashed as it advanced. Oh my god, that's really cool! Back at the church for a brief second, Saber, who was continuing to fire his noble phantasm from the roof of the church, sensed the magical energy he unleashed was being driven back. Then, seeing the compressed swarm of noble phantasms bearing down on him, he could not keep sweat from beading on his forehead. Gazing up at the oncoming dragon of noble phantasms, Saber closed his eyes for a moment, and forcing an intrepid grin, poured his magical energy into his next strike. What's going on? Meanwhile, directly beneath, his master Ayaka was inside the church, voicing her confusion. As far as she could see out the windows, it looked like something on the church roof was glowing, but Ayaka, who's not a mage, had no way to make sure of what was taking place outside. Are you feeling all right, miss? The overseer priest asked her quizzically. Oh, now that you mention it, I do feel a little tired. A little. I see. After a pause for thought, Hansa said, What are you, miss? What? The ability to provide a heroic spirit with that much magical energy isn't normal. At the very least, anyone short of a first-rate mage should have run dry by now, but you... I don't know what you mean. I don't even really know what this magical energy stuff is. Aika frowned, looking troubled. Hansa was observing her with great interest when... No, we haven't got time for questions. We'd better get farther inside. Why? I'm strengthening the wards, the priest answered, staring up at the church's high ceiling. But the roof is about to cave in. The next instant, a portion of the roof gave way and a figure dropped through the opening it left. Aika narrowly avoided a direct hit from the rebel thanks to Hansa yanking her arm. Before the situation could penetrate her brain, however, a haughty man's voice rang out through the hole in the roof. I'd intended to obliterate you along with the church, but I suppose I should praise you for stopping me. It was a man in golden armor. His armor was cracked in places, but his arms were crossed imperturbably. That's a good word, but I can't say it. And he was looking down at the center of rubble piled in the middle of the church. What? The instant Aika laid eyes on the man, she felt as if her brain had received a violent jolt. The instant she laid eyes on his face, to be precise. Oh. She had a feeling that she had seen a similar face years before. Oh. And in a church like this one. Now that must be talking about something that happens in Prototype, I'm guessing, right? Now, is that either talking about Ozymandias or Proto-Gil? I don't know. Because it says years before. Might be, but I don't know. We'll have to see. We haven't read enough because I'm still waiting for the retranslations to figure it out, but it's one of those. When she tried to remember, noise ran through her thoughts. Her brain buzzed. The noise was even in her vision. And in the gaps it made, a girl in a red hood appeared. Huh. Aika tried to clutch her head, but then she realized. Why had the man in golden armor been speaking to the center of rubble? I suppose I should praise you for stopping me. Who had stopped him? Aika tried to think, but the answer came at once. She had recognized the thing in the center of the rubble. For an instant, Aika had mistaken the figure with numerous swords and spears sprouting from its body for part of the rubble. It was unquestionably Saber, who had so recently walked behind her making friendly conversation. While his heart and head were intact, His stomach, shoulders, and thighs were impaled by a number of weapons, enough to kill an ordinary human. Saber? The instant she recognized him, both the noise and the red-hooded girl vanished from her sight. She nearly sank to the floor, but caught herself at the last moment and attempted to approach Saber. She was tripped up by the rubble, however, and fell. The man on the roof, seemingly oblivious to Ayaka, continued to address Saber. You could have avoided those wounds had you dodged. Did you intend to protect this church? I had to execute you for your hubris, but you did succeed in canceling out a single strike. For the moment, you have my praise. At that, Saber, who had thus remained motionless, moved sluggishly and twisted his lips into a grin as he answered the man on the roof. You honor me, Saber said, still breathing feebly and looking up at the golden heroic spirit. I said I can't believe you destroy a church. Don't blame me if God has something to say about it. Absurd! I had my fill of the wrath of the gods long ago. Gods? I see you're a polytheist. The way you talk. So, you too are the primordial travelers. Saber laughed, blood trickling from the corners of his mouth. Mongrel, what do you hold within you? The golden heroic spirit looked at him and asked haughtily without anger or disdain. What do you mean? I do not mean your retinue. I mean the foundation of your heroic spirit. The man on the roof continued to speak dispassionately to the feebly breathing Saber. In any case, it seems you still lack a reason to fight. To challenge me with that attitude is the height of hubris, mongrel. If dubious desires are all you can muster in the face of my treasure, then perish while all you harbor within you rots. He did not even uncross his arms, but ripples formed in the space above him. I will deliver my verdict. Have you any last words? I'd like to say no, but yes. The girl who shared her magical energy with me isn't my master. I just drained her energy. Ayaka had staggered to her feet. Saber's words made her eyes widen. She realized what he was going to say next. Stop. Don't say it. She tried to speak, but her throat refused to function. She was breathing raggedly and on the verge of falling again when Saber said with a smile, She hasn't opposed you, so don't be harsh on her. Very well, but do not forget that I will only grant her consideration. If she turns out to be worthless, then I will simply blow her away, just like the other rabble. Then the armored man slowly raised his hand and made to conclude his words to Saber. Mongrel, I judge you. His sentence, however, was never finished. An instant later, that heroic spirit in golden armor was what? You can't just leave it there. Several minutes later on Main Street. Is that John? The man who had appeared and saved them was their colleague who moments before had been sent flying with a broken neck. His sudden display of superhuman activity seemed to declare that he had truly been reborn. The members of Clan Catling were seized by confusion. Bera's clear, ringing voice cut through the hesitation. Front line, fall back and shear the rear line. Rear line, support John with everything you've got. The barked orders from the normally quiet Vera snapped them back to awareness. The officers each readied their own noble phantasm and surrounded John and the grotesque bowman in the position she had ordered. Far from support, those with close-ranged weapons would only be a hindrance against the bowmen. So the officers judged they ought to leave it to the ranged attackers in the rear line to serve as a distraction. And if that really was John, they ought to know how to coordinate with the rear line. They had planned to support John, and in the meantime find an opportunity to send half of their number inside the hospital as he wished, but several arrows launched by the enemy shattered their formation in an instant. A burly officer with a large shield noble phantasm tried to block one, but the instant the arrow struck, a shock like a blast from an adhesive grenade ran through the surface of the shield and launched him backward, and the bowstring had not even been pulled fully taut. The arrow had been one of several diversionary shots fired without leaving an opening. The officers were painfully aware that the only reason they, along with the city around them, had not been reduced to scraps of meat was that the heroic spirit had reason and, either by his master's orders or his own initiative, was making some effort to maintain the concealment of mystery. When he first arrived with Kerberos, they assumed he was a murderer without an ounce of concern for such things, but he was actually the opposite. As far as that heroic spirit was concerned, using a beast like Kerberos to simply devour the enemy's flesh did more to preserve the concealment mystery than fighting seriously himself would. "Doesn't he have any weaknesses?" one of the officers shouted. It was true that John was moving on par with a heroic spirit, but his opponent's strength far exceeded the expectations of heroic spirits. They'd assumed that such strength must be unique to Gilgamesh, and that possibly the other heroic spirit, thought to be Lancer, who clashed with the King of Heroes on the first day, but they were realizing too late they had been naive. Still, they had known from the beginning that their abilities would not measure up to heroic spirits. They needed to support John, who was likewise outside their calculations, and at least force the bowman to retreat. The bowman must realize that wiping out the officers would not allow him to attack their master or his servant directly, in which case, at a minimum, they only need to convince him that it would not be worth it to continue. Those were the thoughts running through the minds of more than a few officers. When they realized there was another police officer, apart from John, behind the grotesque bowman, the officers wanted to shout at him to follow Vera's orders, but raising their voices would only alert the enemy. When they focused their attention on the officer to see who was ignoring orders, they realized, before they knew it, the one officer behind the bowman had become two, and then two became four. It was not one of them. It was none other than the heroic spirit who had been battling the archer in the guise of a police officer shortly before. The servant Berserker. Berserker, Jack the Ripper, had become a swarm of police officers. That's just a fun sentence to say. Those officers, whose ranks had swelled noiselessly to 16, attempted to launch a surprise attack on the enemy's rear to support John. They were easily scattered. Without turning to face them, the bowman twisted the grotesque wings that sprouted from his back and sliced through the first several jacks who sprang at them. "Whoa! So you can still move." The bowman spoke without looking behind him, in a tone that was equal parts admiration and exasperation. While he spoke, he continued to fend off John's attacks with his bow. The superhuman sense that allowed him to deal with Jack approaching silently from behind him was truly worthy of the name Mind's Eye. Yep, that's a good skill for avoiding, one of the remaining jacks thought and called out. "I'm impressed you can still use your newly stolen wings so well." Other jacks lunged at the bowman as he spoke. The new jacks no longer even had the appearance of police officers. They were an assortment of ordinary townspeople, doctors, the young, old, men and women. Possibly Jack could no longer afford to keep his appearance as uniform. The jacks looked like a pitiful human crowd gathered to assault a demon out of legend, or else to throw themselves on its mercy. Absurd. Ultimately, Jack's power was not even what it had been earlier. Their movements were sluggish. The bowman seemed to realize that because he kept the majority of his attention on the human police officer in front of him. An instant later, however, his assessment changed completely. Countless black arms grew from Jack's shadows and wrapped around the bowman's body. Huh? Shadows. He was surrounded by a jet-black vortex that seemed to swallow even the darkness of night. Having recognized it as magecraft, the bowman, Alcides, let his attention wander around the area while continuing to deflect the police officer's prosthetic hand with his bow. He discovered a distortion in the scenery. It was a crude illusion. No ordinary person would have ever seen through it, but it was obvious to a heroic spirit of Alcides' caliber. "So you've come out of your hole, mage." Alcides judged that it was Berserker's master, and immediately grasped what the shadows meant. They were merely a diversion. If they had been a type of magecraft that inflicted direct harm, he would have been impervious. It would have been a different story if his adversary were a mage from the Age of Gods, but assuming that Berserker's master was a human mage and not a heroic spirit, that was impossible. According to intelligence supplied by his own master, Basilot Corleone, Berserker's master was a genius from the headquarters of the Mage Association known as the Clock Tower. As long as he was a modern mage, however, his magecraft was nothing to fear, and the mage ought to be equally aware of that. In which case, He ought to regard the shadows as a diversion. As a matter of fact, Alkides was aware that his current situation, with multiple heroic spirits in his vicinity, a diversion was far more dangerous than a half-baked attack. Accordingly, he made his next move with care. Peck. That softly muttered word became a weighty curse scattered over the area. John and the Berserkers were forced... That's a good band name. John and the Berserkers were forced to retreat before the force of a horizontal swipe of his great bow. Alkides took advantage of that momentary opportunity to fire the multiple arrows in his hand at once. In the twinkling of an eye, the shafts metamorphosized into birds of war with bronze beaks and talons, which launched themselves the distortion in space on the sidewalk down Main Street. The distortion was torn at with each pass of the magical energy-shrouded birds, revealing the figure of a young man in what appeared to be empty space. Whoa, play ball! The young man disturbed the surrounding air currents to avoid the birds' attacks while he hastily erected a mystical barrier. A mighty shot from Alkides, however, threaded through the whirlwind-scattered birds and pierced the pit of the young man's stomach. Oh no. The avatar of destruction had torn its way through without regard for strong winds or mystical barriers. It had accurately annihilated... Oh no! It had accurately annihilated the young man's core, shattering the surrounding flesh and bone as it destroyed his organs. Oh my god! Master! Berserker cried from behind Alkides' back. Flat! The police officer called John shouted the mage's name as well. His shout reminded Alkides that the name and the information his master had supplied him with had been Flat Escardos, and assured himself that he had disposed of Berserker's master. The magic crest marked onto the mage's body would activate automatically, force his fatal wounds to heal and revive him, but Alkides would not give it time for that. He'd already fired a second and third arrow to destroy the mage's entire body, crest and all. The birds, which had gotten free of the gale, had also begun to peck at it. However, just as the destruction was about to begin, the young man's body began to fade like mist. What? Oh my god, what are we doing? For a moment, Alkides suspected an illusion, but he was quickly proven wrong. He had definitely felt that the birds, which were part of his noble phantasm linked to him by paths of magical energy, pierced his enemy's body. But it was a fact that the corpse was disappearing, almost like a heroic spirit's. Alkides' primary focus shifted to the question of the master he had killed for only a few seconds ago, and in those few seconds, he was completing his complex and bizarre spell. Game, select. The voice came from right beside Alkides. From among the berserkers who had become corpses in that short time, in the midst of that pile, one body Alkides could not remember slaying moved its mouth and hands and rapidly performed magecraft. A moment later, one of the arrows Alkides had knocked burst, causing his now grotesque frame to stagger for an instant. Impossible. Alkides immediately realized what had been done to him. The current of magical energy necessary to activate his Stymphalian birds, part of his noble phantasm, King's Order, had been tampered with and made to short circuit. That, however, was only the beginning of the spell. Just as he tried to regain his footing, he was struck by another burst of magical energy. Alkides was not a mage, but as his body was itself a mass of magical energy, every vein and nerve in it could be called a magic circuit. All of them had become fuses. Oh my god! And were setting off surges of uncontrolled magical energy one after another in chain reaction. Magical energy burst in his lean, steely arms. Magical energy burst in the toes of his feet, so well honed that they sometimes became blades. Magical energy burst in the veins that ran throughout his body, deep and strong as the roots of the world tree. Magical energy burst in his beautifully woven nerves. Magical energy burst in each of his alveoli before he even had a chance to breathe. Magical energy burst behind his eyeballs hidden by the cloth. Magical energy burst in a part of his brainstem. It burst and burst and burst. The interval between bursts of magical energy grew shorter and shorter until he at least felt a massive explosion of magical energy near his heart. He could not distinguish the pain from the heat of it. Half of the wings on his back and the horns on his head snapped off. There was even an explosion of magical energy in the hand that held his bow, tearing off several of his thick talons. The magical energy ran out of control inside his body as well, shredding parts of his origins. But his spirit origin, once renowned as a great hero, was to be feared. No! With a shout of effort, He stamped his foot down onto the street and poured his rampaging magical energy into the earth. A moment later, the asphalt lifted in patches all along the street, which ran for several hundred meters, and ruptured pipes shot fountains of earth and water into the air in unison. Many heroic spirits may have burst entirely by that point, but he held his body together by the force of sheer physical strength. Even so, the resulting damage was extraordinary. The backlash had torn up the street around him, and a number of cars that had been picked up along with it were overturned and half scrapped. Alkides' insides, however, had suffered far greater damage than the cars. It would have ordinarily been inconceivable for a single mage to inflict such damage on a heroic spirit. Alkides' spirit origin, with its extraordinary powerful anti-magic, was impervious to modern magecraft, meaning it had backfired. There was one part of his spirit origin whose anti-magic was weak. It was also part of a berserker, meaning that a path of magical energy had linked it to the young man who had until recently been its master. Oh, the demon! The mage had introduced a spell that disturbed the flow of his magical energy through the power he had stolen from Berserker, the part of him that transformed him into a demon, kind of phantasmal. Even so, it was no easy feat. Unless the mage had a complete grasp of the complex flow of his magical energy in this condition, it would have been impossible, meaning that he had accomplished that. I had to get this close for it to work, the mage who had been hiding among the crowd of berserkers said, revealing a relieved smile. The berserker corpses around him began to vanish. At the same time, the corpse of the mage Alkides had just shot through disappeared completely. It had been a berserker in the form of the mage Flatiscardos. Circumstances piled on circumstances dulled Alkides' mind for an instant, and that momentary unbalance created a fatal opening. A roar struck Alkides' ear. It signaled that the police officer called John had poured all his strength into a desperate strike, and by the time it reached his ears, John was already upon him. The blow momentarily broke the sound barrier. It created a shockwave that sent Flat and the nearby rebel flying. It took just an instant. An impact ran through Alkides' side, feeling so weak that he almost doubted it. It may have been a supersonic blow from a prosthetic hand transformed into a noble phantasm, but that was all it could do to Alkides' superhuman physique. As a matter of fact, the impact had broken off the prosthetic's hand's blade at the base, and the recoil sent John tumbling to the ground several meters away. But it had been enough. John had put all his might into that blow of his prosthetic hand, a thrust of a blade dripping with Hydra venom. It would have been a fatal wound to almost any heroic spirit, but there was a reason it ate into Alkides' spirit origin with a special ferocity. Death. The pure curse of deadly poison. The thing that had once driven Alkides to end his own life coursed through his veins. As it entered his body, Flat spoke the phrase that concluded his spell, signaling his stratagem was complete. Game over. He had created an opening for John, who possessed a strike worthy of being called final. The steps that he had taken to produce that moment of time were simple and obvious. He had offered up his soul. He had offered it to a heroic spirit of the caster class, whom he had only known for a few minutes. Wait, what? What does that mean? What does that mean? Wait, what does this mean? My specialty as a heroic spirit is tinkering with tools that have a bit of notoriety and whip them up into noble phantasms. But I don't get many chances to work on a real heroic spirit. You see, I need the owner's consent for that, which is normally a no-go. But when the pieces fall into place, an exception comes out tasting best. Basically, I'm gonna fiddle around with your ability to become anyone and elevate it. I'll make it so you can turn into strangers even more perfectly. Of course, it's up to you whether your master counts as a stranger. Alexander Dumas' proposal had quite a trade-off. It was to temporarily enhance Jack the Ripper's abilities by combining one of his spirit origin skills, Thousand Faces, and his noble phantasm, Natural Born Killers, with one more ingredient, the essence of his master, Flatiscardos. It was a metaphor, of course. Dumas did not chop up Flat and toss him in a pot. Still, for the master and servant whose links of magical energy Dumas strengthened and whose beings he artificially intermingled, it was the equivalent of being thrown in a blender and turned into a mixture of ground meat. For the master, wait, what? It meant having his own nature mixed with the spirit origin of a killer. Oh, that might not be good. It was impossible to foresee what side and after effects it might have. He might lose his magecraft, or unconsciously commit murders, drawn along by episodes associated with the heroic spirit Jack the Ripper. Oh, that's kind of bad. There was no end to conceivable negatives, but Flat had agreed without hesitation. Jack had been fortified by Damas's noble phantasm, and gained the ability to become the mage Flatiscardos down to last detail. Oh, this is crazy. This is crazy! Including his magecraft. Oh, that's insane. Before they knew it, the pillar of light had reached in the sky had vanished, and in its place, a part of the church that had been its base had collapsed. As darkness engulfed the area, a grave but quiet voice rang out. "Why?" Alcides asked Berserker, the poisoned blade that had broken off John's prosthetic hand still buried in his side. Alcides understood that Berserker had used a perfect disguise to make him mistake Berserker's master's location, although not how they had accomplished that, but how that did not dispel his doubts. "If you can completely become your master, you could just as easily done so and work the spell on me yourself. Why did you risk your master on the battlefield?" Berserker, in the form of a police officer, answered, "Simple. No matter how I completely become my master, there are things I can never possess." At that, Alcides shifted his gaze to Berserker's master, Flatiscardos, who was just picking himself up from the ground. A second one of the command spells on the back of his left hand had faded. Alcides realized that it had been the final push behind that spell that had sent his magical energy out of control. "So, you repurposed one of your own command spells." Command spells only affected servants contracted to their user. It was impossible to overturn that principle and enforce a command on someone else's servant, but by skillfully rewriting its magical energy and using it to hack the path of magical energy that linked Alcides to his master, Vlad had forced him to use a spell equivalent by ordering him to take his own life with a command spell. Well, I guess it was kind of a gamble. Your master already used all their command spells, right, Mr. Archer? If they had even one left, I think I would have bounced off the strength of that connection. Seeing Flat smile that he had been lucky with a look of relief, Alcides realized how abnormal the young man was. "I see. I never expected you to have the sight to perceive so far." Then he muttered to himself in a voice too low for Flat to hear. "So, it's you." What is Flat? They keep hinting that Flat is something, but what does it mean? Flat looked puzzled, but Alcides did not answer his unspoken question. He had realized that death was eating into his body. A death that had been enough to drive the human shell and soul from that hateful man, the glory of God who had once been his other half. Alcides looked at the blade struck in his side and then at John, the owner of the broken prosthetic hand. To John, who was still trying to rise, Alcides said, "Well done, child of man, my brother who rejects divine rule and stands on his own feet." There was a sound of spilling liquid. Dark blood had dripped from under his cloth that had covered the grotesque bowman's face. "If the power you had given had been a divine blessing, I would have slain you at once. But the power coursing through you is born of man and earth. The gods had no hand in it. And so I praise this world, this age. You may have used the water serpent's venom, but I congratulate you on producing a technique to destroy me while rejecting divine aid." Was his calm speech the mark of a heroic spirit who realized his end was near and meant to end it with dignity? John was under the illusion that it was, until Alcides continued. "And I pity you, hero." What? Alcides' side was being eaten away by the venom, melting into a black wound before John's puzzled gaze. But an instant later, the jet-black toxin was consumed by mud of an even more sinister hue. What? The police officers, Flat, and the berserkers froze in spite of themselves. The mud-like mass of magical energy that welled up from Alcides' body enveloped the Hydra venom as if to consume it, to consume death itself, and was sucked back into the wound. Oh my god, I thought he was actually going to die. "If I had merely thrown off the robe of godhood, I would have suffered then gone to my rest. The poisoned wound that had eaten so deep it exposed the ribs and hip bone vanished, leaving his body fully restored to its place. Before my spirit origin was twisted, I would have been willing to fall to that scratch. That venom alone may have been enough to eat through all my countless lives. Then he stood before the speechless John and declared, "But we have both been unfortunate." There seemed to be a faint hint of resignation in his voice, but it turned to immediate anger. "I have lost my 12 lives. But know that you cannot vanquish me, afflicted as I am with vile mud with deadly venom." With rage, not at John and the others, but at himself, at limitless power itself, Alcides bellowed as if pronouncing a curse. "It will take more than venom to dye my corrupted blood, the flames of vengeance that my soul harbors." Then, his magical energy overflowed. It was a writhing magical energy, but it became a physical wind that buffeted the bodies of those nearby. A vortex of magical energy stained a dark red sweep over the area. It was as if Alcides had become a monstrous tornado. The familiars that had been observing the battle were blown away. Magic circuits screamed. The mere touch of the wind drove some to their knees. Alcides had not done anything. This was the result of his mere presence. He wasn't even taking this seriously, one of the officers muttered with a look tinged with despair. "No, he was," a berserker answered with a wry grin. "Until now, he's been seriously scouting things out. I suppose he's been wary of everything around him." He was also wearing a look that said there was nothing more to be done, and clearly considered how to make an escape with his master. That was why we had to kill him completely here, before he devoted his power to his murderous impulses. A moment later, Alcides sprang into action. His target, however, was neither the police force nor Berserker. As if to say they were now beneath his notice, the lone Avenger kicked the earth. The kick that carried Alcides high into the air, where he drew back the arrow he had knocked and loosed it without hesitation. Loosed it at the archer who, shrouded in an aura of divinity, was at the moment about to pass judgment on Saber. Oh, that's what got him. Because of course he's a god. Oh my god, this chapter just keeps going. On top of the church, Gilgamesh stood on a section of the roof that had narrowly avoided collapse and looked down on Saber, who lay drenched in blood on a pile of rubble. "Mongrel, I judge you!" He was about to deliver his verdict, not as a king, but as a judge, when a tempest of dark red magical energy swirled around him, and an intense bloodlust bore down on him. "How boorish!" Gilgamesh tutted with an icy expression, halting his judgment mid-sentence. Space rippled and noble phantasms launched out a gate of Babylon to intercept the oncoming arrow. "If I were here as a king, I would dismiss this as jester's antics, but if you interrupt my judgment, I will eliminate you." Then, he slowly turned and addressed Alcides, the archer come avenger, who had alighted on the opposite edge of the church. "I see you have been unmasked, clown. I will permit you to remove your cloth as well." Gilgamesh continued, as if to say that the dark red magical energy shrouding his opponent's body was of no concern to him. "I would look on your tear-stained face. My tears have long since run dry. I shed them all the day when the divine tyrants took everything from me. So you drip mud from your eyes instead. I see you've become quite an eyesore. I shall make the organizers of this ritual pay for defiling the Grail, one of my treasures, with mud sullied with a mongrel's obsession." After insinuating that he had perceived the nature of the red-black, mud-like magical energy, Gilgamesh asked Alcides as if to test him, "So, what will you do now? You could say that coming from my head while you still have strength to spare was the right choice, although impertinent, but do you really believe I cannot dispel your paltry corruption?" "Mighty king, it is true that corruption would be nothing to you if you made use of your treasures." In contrast to the immense vortex of magical energy swirling around him, Alcides was unsettlingly calm and relaxed. His arms hung loose at his sides, his right arm lightly clutched his bow, and yet his tensed limbs were pregnant with an ominous sense they might become decapitating blades at any moment. "Oh, but feeble warrior, it is not corruption that will slay you. Oh, it is the corpse drowned in the mud. Okay. Between the two heroic spirits was the massive pit created by the collapse of the church roof. Ah, what a shame, Saber muttered, watching the two presences squaring off above him. A big war's about to start, and looks like I'm going to miss out. Idiot! Aika, who'd been practically crawled up the rubble, shouted in a low voice. It's no time to be worrying about things like that. We need to get out of here. Yes, sorry, Aika. I meant to keep the church safe, but I slipped up just a little. You want to brush this off as a little? Listen, you need first aid. The church must have bandages or something. Trying to heal a heroic spirit with bandages. I guess you really aren't a mage. The blood-covered Saber gave Aika a wry grin. Besides, your concern is far better medicine. This is no time for jokes. We have to at least get you away from here. Aika grabbed Saber's arm and tried to lift him over the shoulder. Oh, but hang on. Accepting that kind of help from a subject I'm meant to protect would be both a disgrace as a knight and a king. Your name was Mud the moment you started hanging out with me. Now hurry! Causing you to disparage yourself like that is a disgrace as a heroic spirit. Saber somehow struggled to his feet unaided and, as if to say that his heart at least was unbroken, forced a pained smile and said, Of course, after getting us into the situation, I can't complain if you tell me I'm not fit to be a servant. The words Saber muttered atop the mountain of rubble naturally failed to reach the heroic spirits above him. I may already be a corpse, but my sins are eternal. Having declared himself a dead man, Alcides took a step forward, and so I shall consign my body and soul to the seat of oblivion that drifts in Hades. A nonchalant step. Nevertheless, the King of Heroes recognized it as a weighty step, charged with Alcides' whole being. My great foe and pitiful fellow, dance along my mad rush. Then Alcides, his posture still relaxed, spoke with force. 9 lives. At that same instant, Gilgamesh deployed his Gate of Babylon. Alcides fired his bow. Hundreds of noble phantasms were fired. Not the weak noble phantasms that Gilgamesh had attacked with during their confrontation in the Wasteland. Each and every one would be enough to smash his opponent's spirit origin. If they had been fired with conceit, the myriad noble phantasms would have fallen as a rain of vicious bloodlust with no thought for efficiency or any other consideration. Now that he was standing on the same land as his friend Enkidu, however, Gilgamesh had no conceit. His onslaught consisted of accurate noble phantasms aimed precisely at the parts of Alcides' body that the Nemean lion's pelt did not cover. It was a lethal swarm that would have obliterated any ordinary heroic spirit. And yet, the rapid barrage of arrows that Alcides fired while leaping to one side were drowning those noble phantasms by matching them shot for shot. Each arrow shot down multiple noble phantasms, but even more shocking than their force were the unusual trajectories and speed of the barrage. Alcides was knocking 2 or 3 arrows at once and drawing his bow too fast for the eye to follow. And that was not all. His arrows changed trajectory midair as if each shaft had a will of its own, precisely shooting down Gilgamesh's oncoming noble phantasms. Those he could not completely evade, he blocked with the pelt by twisting his body, nullifying them. Seeing the pelt undamaged, the King of Heroes snorted and made his next move. I shall personally assess. A large distortion in space formed behind him. How well that pelt of yours can recognize the works of man. From the air to his left, blazing white flames. From the air to his right, shining silver liquid. To be precise, the liquid itself was colorless, but the moisture in the air around it froze instantly, giving it a silvery gleam. As they were in the King of Heroes' treasury, both fire and liquid must have been human creations. They were joined by man-made thunderbolts, and the storm of fire, ice, and lightning assailed Alcides. Alcides, for his part, drew his bow back especially far. The long bow bent back. Just as it seemed about to snap in two, it was released, and it took form in the sky above the church. It was 9 arrows shrouded in ominous magical energy, whose twisting trajectories looked like titanic serpents. They covered the sky with over Main Street like the Hydra of legend, devouring not only onrushing noble phantasms, but flame cold and even lightning alike. Had the bowman been his proper self, his shots would have been shrouded in not sinister mud-like energy, but in pure divinity. It was originally a culmination of skilled divinities said to be clad in dragons. That noble phantasm, when unleashed with a sword, was a breathless dance of 9 strikes, and with a spear, a series of 9 blows, was no secret art passed down from father to son. It was a myth that the great hero had created and perfected alone. The shafts he fired had become a disciple of vengeance, having, however, raced between the skyscrapers with appearances that suggested vipers or evil dragons. And, as if to declare that the gleaming king of heroes would be their final prey, the 9 outspread great serpent heads bore down on him. Hydra venom. It may be the way of the world for a king to be served poison, but you lack artistry, mongrel. He paused his barrage of noble phantasms, caused another ripple in the air in front of him, preparing a door for new treasure. I hate to take snakes into my treasury, but I already have venom to match yours, along with its flesh, blood, and anti-venom. We're still going. This chapter's incredible. You can win, Lord Gilgamesh. I know you can. Tine, who had been watching the clash from the top floor of the casino, instinctively clenched her fists. The grotesque bowman who called himself Alcides must be one of the most dangerous opponents in this Holy Grail war. But what Tine saw of the exchange convinced her that her own servant Gilgamesh would triumph. He seemed to be deflecting noble phantasms. Oh, I missed it. I lost my eyes. Where am I looking? Wait. I lost it. He seemed to be deflecting all of his opponent's attacks, and those 9 bow shots that seemed to be a noble phantasm must be Alcides' trump cards. Judging from circumstantial evidence, Alcides possessed a noble phantasm that stole his opponent's noble phantasm, which smacked of foul play. But the way things were going, Gilgamesh would not even need to draw Ea, the Sword of Rupture, to unleash Enema Elish, so there would be no risk of it being stolen. More than anything, it was Gilgamesh's attitude, which betrayed not an ounce of fear or distress, that made Tine feel relieved. I would express no less, my king. The words Tine could not suppress were not those of a mage seeking to reclaim her land. They were the words of a child who had not yet fully to mature, entranced by the King of Heroes' Radius. Tine had forgotten that while she was a retainer of the King of Heroes, she was also Gilgamesh's master. And Tine was unaware that, however great and exalted a being Gilgamesh might be, even if the King of Heroes abandoned conceit and carelessness, the Holy Grail War was not so soft that could be won without a master and servant fighting as a team. Oh my god, is one of the arrows going to go for her? Just as Gilgamesh was readying a noble phantasm to intercept the 9 arrows shrouded in grotesque, dark red magical energy that were closing in on him, the distortions in space that spread around him suddenly vanished. What? At that, Gilgamesh frowned for the first time. The disappearance of the distortions in space pointed to a single fact. The gates to the treasury of Babylon that held every last one of the king's treasures, to the vault said by some to still exist somewhere in the world, and by others to exist in the space entirely, in other space entirely, had all shut. Gilgamesh himself, of course, would do no such thing. But was there anyone who could? It was impossible. In the fractions of a second it took Gilgamesh to reach that conclusion, the hero-slaying, poisoned arrows were still closing in on him. But this Gilgamesh was neither conceited nor careless. Refusing to despair so soon, he attempted to bring the noble phantasm he had already fired to bear to counter them when... lines. It bore a strange resemblance to the song of the earth that Enkidu had sung on the first day. It resounded throughout Snowfield without warning, becoming a cacophony that scrambled the brains of everyone there. What set it apart from Enkidu was the timbre. It was not the beautiful singing voice ringing out in praise of the people and its land, of the land and its people. It was a resentful roar of a twisted monster that seemed to curse the whole world. Tine witnessed the look on Gilgamesh's face in the moment through her far-seeing spell. What? For an instant she did not believe her eyes. The look on Gilgamesh's face reflected in them was one she had never seen before. At first glance, it was close to his look of surprise when he sensed Enkidu's presence, except for his eyes. Unbelievably, his eyes were tinged with an emotion the King of Heroes must never show. An emotion ordinarily seen in the eyes of the King of Heroes' opponents when they looked at him. His eyes expressed shock, irritation, hesitation, and the faintest tinge of fear. Everyone who witnessed that sight, momentary though it was, reached the same conclusion. The instant he heard that roar, the King of Heroes had flinched. Impossible. It's not true. My eyes are playing tricks on me. Tine did not have time to finish her thought before her far-seeing spell showed her a tragedy. The instant that one of the arrows bearing down on the King of Heroes pierced his shoulder. It had barely missed his vitals. With a poisoned arrow that hardly mattered. The other arrows which he had evaded were closing in on him. His treasury refused to open. The one arrow impact had unbalanced him, and the swarm of arrows that was bearing down on him with too much force for him to deflect with his sword. With nothing more to be done, a second and third shaft pierced the King of Heroes' arm and leg. The remaining arrows would be sure to strike vital points. That instant, when it seemed to everyone that the King of Heroes was about to fall in an shocking upset, a spear of earth flew out of nowhere, passing by the King of Heroes to strike down the arrows. The magical energies shrouding the shafts were deflected with a thunderous crash, shaking the glass windows in the glass in the surrounding buildings. So, we've been interrupted. Damn you. The King of Heroes' rage-filled face was turned to the night sky. It was impossible to tell if he could even hear his opponent. To think that you would wander here. Do not tell me. You have fallen that far. His words were not aimed at Alcides. Gilgamesh's eyes, fixed on empty air, had already sensed the presence. A presence that, until then, had been skillfully concealed. A presence that had emerged the instant the poison arrow had struck Gilgamesh, as if to say it was no longer had any reason to hide. And, in answer to his word, a third voice rang out in the sky over Main Street. Fallen? How rude! It was a beautiful, clear voice, but so utterly cold it gave its listeners chills. My elevation has never changed. You just convinced yourself that you had climbed above us. Am I wrong? From behind a skyscraper appeared a woman floating in the air, with white skin, red eyes, and inhuman beauty. Gilgamesh did not recognize her appearance, but he knew the being that most likely dwelt within her more than he would like. You might even say that he knew her too well. Still, you finally left me an opening. Actually, I think the searing pain from that venom should be hitting you about now. Don't you want to writhe? Hurry up and scream in agony. I'll do the favor of laughing at you. The beauty told Gilgamesh with a faint smile as the Hydra venom began to eat into him. But Gilgamesh, although he must be suffering a shock for which the word pain was insufficient, like powerful acid coursing through every vein in his body, and despite the sweat beating on his forehead, looked down on the beauty hovering above him. How you bark. To think that even the passage of millennia has not worn off the arrogance stuck to your soul. Quite a deep-rooted mold, it seems. Say what you will. The woman who the King of Heroes himself, like the word egotism walking around in his suit of armor, had declared arrogant, continued with a complacent smile. Still, tracking you down took a lot of work. You deserve 1,000 deaths just for making me walk through that gloomy cave. At the word cave, both Gilgamesh and Tine, who had heard through her far-seeing spell, simultaneously thought of the same place. The cave in the ravine where the outsider mage had first summoned Gilgamesh. But I forgive you. After all, it helped me find something that will come in handy for killing you. The woman. Oh my god, he threw away the key. The woman, glaring down at Gilgamesh, produced a key of lavish workmanship. What she held in her hand was none other than the catalyst the mage had used to summon Gilgamesh. The key to his treasury. It was literally just a work of art that served to open the treasury's front gate. Just a pointless knick-knack that a mere human couldn't do anything with, right? Damn you. The woman regarded Gilgamesh, who groaned, drenched in cold sweat, but continued to stand erect with a charming tilt of her head, and spoke with a smile that chilled to the bone. But in my hands, well, I can at least relock it. It was a declaration that she had sealed the King of Heroes' treasury, fatal to Tine's faction. But as if to say there were more important things, the King of Heroes smirked and pronounced with sarcasm, I was surprised that you shut the door before my treasures blinded you. I said you had fallen, but I was mistaken. You deserve praise, Ishtar. Ishtar. The woman answered the name he spat out with a cold smile in place of acknowledgement. Gilgamesh continued to sneer ironically back at her, suppressing the pain of the venom that had racked his body with his superhuman pride alone. Or did that vessel influence you? Oh, not a chance. I completely overshadow her original personality. She's kind of a human made just to be a vessel. The next instant, a 7-colored radiance, like a rainbow, spread from beneath her feet, and a gargantuan thing revealed itself behind her. Most likely, the creature that had just let out the bellow that made Gilgamesh flinch. Yeah, that's her with the key. Interestingly, she actually kind of resembles, like her outfit kind of looks like, what's her face? Ereshkigal. It's like Ereshkigal's Final Ascension almost, but in white, you know? Like this one. At the sight of the massive thing revealed, the true berserker summoned by a master named Haruri, although he had no way of knowing at the time. Wait, several emotions ran through the King of Heroes. Wait. Oh, I thought it was Gugalana. Okay, no, this is the beast summoned was not Gugalana, but it's the berserker, yeah. Then, looking at it with eyes ultimately filled with rage, he slowly shook his head. Well, well. I of all people have misjudged. Not the original, but an inferior echo of her curse. Ishtar's only reply was a faint smile. Instead of answering Gilgamesh, she surveyed the area and broke into a broad, cheerful grin. I'd really love to play with you more, but it looks like things will get annoying if I take any more time. What? A servant of Ereshkigal? Or Nurgle, maybe? I suggest you run. It's said that it's eaten its fill, but you just suffered divine punishment, you know. Perhaps she had overheard his conversation with Saber. With those dispassionate words, she and the gigantic heroic spirits turned their backs and left without a parting shot, leaving behind her a last remark accompanied by a smile that was too wicked or bewitching for a deity. I went to the trouble of sparing your vitals, so suffer as long as you can. Or so I'd like to say. With that, Ishtar halted and turned her head toward Gilgamesh with an even crueler smile. It seems she'll never forgive either of you, even if I do. The next instant, a 7-colored halo shot from the steel colossus, twisted and tampering, something like the head of a jackhammer, and plunged straight into Gilgamesh's belly. Lord Gilgamesh! No! No! The young master's cries echoed high into the sky. They did not reach the woman called Ishtar or Alcides near the ground. Whether they reached her servant Gilgamesh was impossible to determine. Only one thing was certain. Gilgamesh had stood majestically and firm in the face of his enemies, until the moment he lost consciousness. The catastrophic, racking pain that even the centaur, who had been the tutor of numerous heroes, had abandoned his immortality for and had longed for death. Even eaten away at by the venom in 3 places and impaled through the gut by a steel beast, Gilgamesh continued to stand before his enemies as king. Gilgamesh, the King of Heroes. In this battle, he had been devoid of conceit. The fact that, even so, he had fallen before the schemes of a deity and the violence of a beast was driven home. At last, the church roof he stood on crumbled and vanished into rubble, and the path of magical energy that connected him to Tine began to fade, and the king's spirit origin completely vanished. Then, a few dozen seconds later, came an overwhelming swarm of blackness, different from Alkidi's mud. The jet black wind that blew from a single room in the hospital enveloped the entire area. And all life vanished from Main Street, which had been the scene of much fighting. It ultimately erased Gilgamesh, Alkides, the police officer, Flat, and even the overseer, priest Ike, and Saber inside the church. Not even an insect's corpse remained in its wake. Only a silent cityscape. Not even the chief of police, Faldius, or Francesca Prelati, who were on the side of the masterminds, could grasp the full scope of what had taken place. Silence simply continued to hold sway over Main Street. What the frick? So Gilgamesh died, which, like, okay. People always joke about Gil being a jobber, but, like, it is really funny that he is the first to die in this, because, again, they're always calling him a jobber. But then, the Pale Rider just took everyone? Oh, well, I guess we're gonna learn in the next chapter. Mercenary, Assassin, and Vampire. Oh my god, this chapter was insane. Not only was it super long, but it was like, man, in my head was a whole movie, and I hope me reading it gave you that movie as well. I really hope so. Thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you next time for some more, as we we got 62 pages left. Probably not finish it off, probably the second final part, and then maybe one final one after that. We'll see how it goes for time. But yeah, we'll see you then for some more Fate. Oh, it's catching up on me. We'll see you for some more Fate Strange Fake with Volume 5 next time, guys. We'll see you then. Ciao. Yo.